Hello, everyone, and welcome to Non-Christian Bible Talk. I'm your host, Leanna. If you're new here, this is a podcast where we talk about the Bible, and I go kind of verse through verse, giving you some historical context and a non-Christian point of view of what the Bible says. Today we are discussing Genesis 16, which is the next part of the Abram and Sarai story. So, who are the players in this story? The players are Abram, who becomes Abraham, Sarai, who becomes Sarah, and their female slave, Hagar. A little backstory on Hagar, or what we assume, or I assume, is the backstory on Hagar, is back in Genesis 12, Abram takes his family to Egypt, to the Pharaoh's palace, and the Pharaoh sees Sarai, who is one of the most beautiful women in all the land, it seems, and he wants to make her a wife or concubine. The Pharaoh wants to please Abram for his sister's sake and gives him livestock and female servants. So I'm assuming this is where Hagar came from and why they specify that she is Egyptian. Just to remind y'all of what happens in that situation, God gets mad at the Pharaoh because of this and inflicts him with serious diseases and his household. Once again, we can't take the blame or put the blame on who actually deserves it, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, so in verse 1, we see that after 11 years and 4 or 5 chapters, we are still talking about Sarai and Abram having children, which has not happened yet. This is when she introduces us to Hagar, who they specify is her Egyptian slave. Verse 2 I find very interesting, and I'm going to quote this one. Verse 2 says, "So she said to Abram, 'The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her.'" There's 2 things I'm going to talk about here, and the first is the fact that Sarai seems to blame God for her not being able to have children. I'm not sure exactly why she does this here. It's really is God's fault in a way because God controls these things, right? But at the same time, they've gone through a lot here. And so she has committed some sins in a way, or at least Abram has. So why can't it be Abram's fault? That's just one point. 2 would be, I understand that she has a lot of pressure on her for not having children. First, let's talk about having a surrogate. So having a surrogate, whether it's through a slave, a concubine, using a slave to be a surrogate for children is actually common practice, it seems. There was actually legal code in the Code of Hammurabi in Babylonia that includes laws related to inheritance and status of children born of concubines. So the surrogate mother has no legal rights to the child. The child is legally the father and his wife's. And this is all about inheritance laws and who gets what next, really. So in this culture, it seems it's all about the heir. We still have this to this day in many cultures, including our own, that having an heir and a spare, a lot of times, would be the most important thing for a man to do. It's all about family and money. So getting money and getting an heir to continue that bloodline for that money is the most important thing for him to do. So the next important thing would be to have a wife who can have you that child. Well, in this case, Sarai is not doing that. And it's putting a lot of pressure on both of them, I'm sure, to have this child. And at this point, he is like 75 to 80 years old. I'm sorry, he is 86 years old. We find out here in a minute when his child is born. So he is 85 years old at this point, and he has not had a child, and his wife, who's about that age as well, has not provided him one. And they've probably been married for a really long time, since they were probably, at least Sarai, was probably a child when she married him. So things look really bad for both of them now in the eyes of their society, because being that old without a child would make him look weak as a man, because he's not fertile, and it would make her look like, one, she doesn't want to have a child, so that makes her look horrible, and two, that there should probably be a second wife by now in most people's eyes, but I'm guessing that. I didn't find anything in my research that would say that, but most men at this point did not have just a single wife, I wouldn't assume. So the fact that he has one wife who is barren probably makes him look pretty bad. In verse 3, Sarai goes to Abram and asks her to sleep with her slave and have a child. And in verse 4 that happens. From what I find, that Sarai has the right to ask him to do this, and he would have done it for all the reasons we can think of. There was no reason for him not to go to bed with Hagar. Interesting, my translation has that Sarai gave Hagar to be her husband's wife. This would not have been probably what happened here. There would have been no reason for him to marry her. He could have just slept with her as a surrogate for the child. I don't know for sure, but nothing I found said that the surrogate had to be, one, married to him, obviously not, and two, have any legal, concubine or such, any sort of contract, quote unquote. He just needed to have a surrogate. They needed a willing, or unwilling in this case, which we'll talk about in a minute, a body to have the child. Later on in a minute, you'll see he calls Hagar Sarai's slave, not her sister wife or his wife, because if that was the case, he would have dealt with the situation impending and not Sarai. Now, moving on. In verse 4, we see that he does sleep with Hagar and she does conceive a child. Then we see that Hagar starts despising her mistress. In the next verse 5, Sarai goes to Abram and, quote, "You're responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows she is pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Now, this is a whole lot of something right here, because, one, let's just talk about the big elephant in the room. No one asked Hagar what she wanted, and that is a big part of this verse to me, because we are showing here, the writers of this, is showing us that slaves have zero rights over their bodies. It does not matter what Hagar wants. This is all from Sarai's point of view, and has zero things to do with Hagar, even though she is the one that just basically was forced to sleep with her master and then have his child, which she knows is going to be legally taken away from her after it is born. Now, honestly, I don't know what's next in this story, the next chapters, so I don't know how this turns out. But as far as we can tell here, she is told to get pregnant, and she does. Of course, she's despising her mistress at this point. Wouldn't we all despise the person that forced us to be raped and have a child for them? That's ridiculous. Of course she does. The next thing we're going to unpack is Sarai asked Abram to do this. Abram did it, and now she is blaming him. "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering." What wrong is Sarai suffering? The fact that her slave hates her because, one, she's a slave, and two, she is now pregnant with your husband's child after being raped. Yeah, I can understand all that. Now, I'm going to say something that a lot of people are going to dislike, but here we go. Then the asshole in chapter 6 says, "Your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think is best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so Hagar ran away. Yeah, I can see that. Abram Yeah. Okay. Whatever. Moving right along. I do find it a little strange that Abram allowed Sarai to mistreat Hagar, carrying his first and only child, which that was dumb because first means only, obviously. But you get what I'm saying. Like, his only child is inside this woman, and he allowed his wife to abuse her, mistreat her. I don't know if he would have shown her a whole lot of favoritism over his wife, obviously, but to allow something to happen to the unborn child, I don't know if that would have been the case or not. So in the next couple of verses, we see that Hagar ran away, and then an angel comes to her, which I thought God and his angels were basically all knowing, but comes to her and was like, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" So she says, "I'm running away from my mistress." The angel tells her to go back and submit to her mistress. Could you imagine? And I'm sure they sent a male angel as well, which would make it 1,000% worse in my mind, but that's just me. And he says to her, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." What does she care at this point? I'm sorry, I know I'm ranting a little, but what would she care? She has been mistreated, she has been raped, she has been all the things, and this angel tells her, if you go back and do whatever this woman says and let her beat on you, then I will make your descendants numerous. I'm not trying to be rude, but would a slave care about this? Again, I hope no one gets offended by any of this. It's just, I don't know. And I want to know, obviously, but I don't know because I don't think that is what she is worried about right now. She's worried about her safety and the safety of her unborn child. Here's the part I find very amusing. So the angel says to her, "You are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son. His name shall be Ishmael. For the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man." I really like this. I don't honestly know what it means, but I love this, and I hope in the future chapters we read about how he is a wild donkey of a man. I also really want to call people this from now on, and I don't know how I would use it, but we will figure it out. The next part of this tells us a little bit about who he will be as a person. It says, "His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility towards all his brothers." I mean, that is a real forecasting of who this person will be. He will be basically a hostile, hated person. What is going on here? But hopefully we'll find out. Next, Hagar says something that I don't fully understand, and I need to do more research on it. Is verse 13, and I'm going to quote this. "She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. 'You are the God who sees me.' For she said, 'I have now seen the one who sees me.'" I really don't understand that. I'm assuming she's talking about where he says that God has seen her misery. They're saying that even God cares about the feelings of slaves, which he should care about all people. But maybe it's the wording. "You are the God who sees me. I have now seen the one who sees me." I don't know. I'm going to have to do a little more research on that. So I guess she goes back to her masters. Even though it doesn't say that, it just says that she gives birth to a son. I don't know. I'm assuming, though, that she does the will of God and is obedient and goes back to the people who abused her. That is where we are in the story of Abram and Sarah. That is Genesis 16 in its entirety. There's so much more I'm sure I could have talked about, and I'll probably edit this in the future to add more as I learn more, but that is what we have for now. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I ask that if you know more about this, and there is so much more to know about this, you'll leave comments in the bottom letting me know your thoughts or feelings or some facts. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you subscribe, and I will see you next time with Genesis 17. I'm sure a continuation of the Abram-Sarai story.